All right, so today we are going to dive deep into Eritrea.
Okay.
Their ambitions, their strategy, and their place in a world that feels like it's constantly on the brink of, well, something big.
Yeah.
We're using this recent international conference they held in Asmara
Right.
as our window into their thinking.
Okay.
It's not just about what happened at the conference, though.
Right.
It's about extracting clues to their game plan,
Okay.
their playbook for development and global engagement.
What's fascinating here is that this conference themed international and regional cooperation for sustainable development
Okay.
wasn't just some local gathering.
Right.
You had diplomats, scholars, even officials from international organizations,
Wow.
all in Asmara, focused on Eritrea.
Yeah, it seems like they're really trying to make a splash to put themselves on the map.
Yeah.
And according to the conference organizer, Dr. Halima Mohammed, there's been this surge of interest in Eritrea-focused research lately.
And it's not just passive interest.
Oh.
Eritrea seems to be actively encouraging this research, almost like they're trying to shape the narrative, control the story
Right.
that's being told about them.
Okay. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Almost like they're playing 4D chess while everyone else is stuck on checkers. Is that reading too much into it?
Not necessarily. It's strategic.
Wow.
Minister
A mess.
Yaman, Eritrea's information minister,
Right.
even said outright
Okay.
that the conference was partly about pushing back
Oh, okay.
against years of negative press.
So it's damage control, but also something more ambitious.
Right.
Right?
That's
Like they're trying to reposition themselves
Yes.
on the global stage.
Yeah. And to do that, they need to present a compelling alternative.
Right.
It's not enough to just say, hey, we're not that bad.
Right.
They need to offer a vision,
Yeah.
a path forward.
And this conference seems to be the launching pad for that vision.
But they're not shying away from the tough stuff either.
Oh, really?
Minister Yaman painted a pretty stark picture
Okay.
of the current global situation,
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
the world being in a super turbulent state right now.
He used some pretty strong language, calling it unprecedented and dangerous stress on global security, right? Almost like the whole system is about to snap.
Right. And he brought up the Thucydides trap.
Okay.
It's this idea from ancient Greece, named after the historian Thucydides.
Okay.
Basically, it says that when you have a rising power
Right.
challenging an existing one, things tend to get, well, explosive.
Yeah.
Think Sparta versus Athens,
Right.
or in more recent times, Germany's rise in the early 20th century.
Okay, so he's laying out this really bleak global outlook.
Yeah.
But then instead of offering solutions on that grand scale, he shifts to Eritrea's regional approach, right?
Yes. He advocated for what they're calling a modular approach
Yeah.
to continental cooperation.
Hold on. Modular approach.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us a little?
Sure.
What is that?
Imagine trying to build a house all at once
Right.
without laying a proper foundation or putting up the walls first.
Okay.
It's not going to work, right?
Right.
That's kind of what they're saying about African development.
Okay.
Instead of aiming for some huge continent-wide union right away, they're saying focus on building strong regional partnerships first.
Okay.
Those become the building blocks for something bigger down the line.
Okay. So it's like,
Right.
let's walk before we run.
Exactly.
Seems pretty sensible, especially given all the different
Yeah.
political and economic landscapes across Africa.
It's about pragmatism,
Okay.
focusing on achievable goals
Right.
and building trust gradually.
But Minister Yamani didn't just talk about cooperation, right? He also had some pretty pointed critiques
Yes.
of what he called debilitating dependency and surrogate tendencies in Africa.
And those phrases are key
Yeah.
to understanding Eritrea's worldview. They see a lot of African nations as being too reliant on aid and support from outside powers, often former colonial powers.
Right.
That's the debilitating dependency.
Okay.
And the surrogate tendencies refer to African leaders essentially acting on behalf of those
Gotcha.
outside interests rather than truly serving their own people.
Wow. Okay, so they're not pulling any punches.
Yep.
That's a pretty bold statement to make on a stage with all those international players present.
It is, and it gets at the heart of what Eritrea seems to be trying to do.
Okay.
Position themselves as independent, self-reliant,
Right.
and truly representing African interests.
Okay, so we've got this backdrop of a turbulent world.
Yeah.
the need for African self-reliance and this modular approach to regional cooperation.
Right.
But where does Eritrea specifically fit into all of this?
Well,
what's their unique selling proposition?
Minister Yaman was very keen on highlighting Eritrea's economic potential.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to their so-called blue economy.
Okay, blue economy. That sounds intriguing, but I need a bit more than just a catchy phrase.
Sure.
What does that actually mean in Eritrea's context?
Think about their geography.
Okay.
They have this vast coastline along the Red Sea, which is a major shipping lane.
Right.
And it's not just about trade.
Okay.
The blue economy encompasses everything from marine resources like fishing and potential offshore oil and gas to things like coastal tourism and even renewable energy from ocean currents.
So they're looking at the ocean as this untapped source of wealth and development?
Exactly.
Kind of like how some landlocked countries might focus on mining or agriculture. Eritrea's got the sea.
And Minister Yamane stressed that they're committed to developing this blue economy sustainably.
Okay.
Which, to be honest, is a pretty big challenge.
Right.
Balancing economic growth with environmental protection is something a lot of countries struggle with.
It's one thing to talk about sustainability, but actually implementing it is a whole other story.
Exactly.
So are there any specific examples from the conference that give us a sense of...
Well, there was a presentation by a marine biologist who was studying the coral reefs off the coast of Eritrea.
Okay.
Apparently, they're some of the most diverse and healthy reefs in the world.
Oh,
which is pretty remarkable.
That's amazing.
Given the environmental pressures in the region.
So they're doing research trying to understand the ecosystem before they just start exploiting it?
Right.
That's a good sign, right?
It is. It suggests they're at least thinking about the long-term consequences of their actions.
Right.
But of course, the real test will be how they translate that research into actual policy and development practices.
All right, so we've got this picture of Eritrea trying to leverage its unique position and resources to become a player in the region, maybe even on the global stage.
Right.
But there's another layer to their strategy that I found particularly intriguing.
Yeah.
This concept of a social contract that Minister Yamane kept referencing.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
He wasn't just talking about economic development for its own sake.
Right.
He kept emphasizing the sacrifices of the Eritrean people.
Okay.
How they fought for their independence and continue to work hard to build their nation.
And his point was that those sacrifices need to be rewarded, right? That the people deserve to share in the prosperity they're helping to create.
He even used the phrase stakeholder rights, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
It suggests that the government sees itself as accountable to its citizens. Not just in terms of providing basic services, but in terms of ensuring that the benefits of development are shared equitably.
So it's not just about building a strong economy. It's about building a just society.
Yeah.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
Especially in a world where the gap between rich and poor seems to be constantly widening.
Right.
But it also raises some questions.
Yeah.
For example, how does this idea of a social contract square with some of the criticisms that have been leveled at Eritrea's human rights record?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
We can't just gloss over those criticisms, especially concerns about freedom of speech and political dissent.
Yeah.
Can you really have a social contract without those fundamental freedoms?
That's a big question.
Okay, I'm already hooked.
Yeah.
But before we go down that rabbit hole, I want to touch on one more thing that caught my attention.
Okay.
Remember how Minister Yamane talked about territorial ambitions destabilizing the Horn of Africa?
And that was a very deliberate choice of words.
Yeah.
He didn't name any names, but it's pretty clear. He's alluding to some of the regional tensions and border disputes that have plagued the Horn of Africa for decades.
Right, and those conflicts have a huge impact on development.
Huge.
You can't build a thriving economy if you're constantly worried about your neighbors.
Exactly.
So how is Eritrea navigating those complexities?
Yeah.
Are they trying to position themselves as peacemakers?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something we'll definitely need to unpack in the next part of our deep dive.
All right. I'm already on the edge of my seat.
Okay.
So we've got this vision of Eritrea, ambitious, strategic, and maybe a little bit enigmatic.
Yeah.
They're trying to rewrite the narrative, leverage their resources, and build a society based on this idea of a social contract. But will they be able to overcome the challenges and achieve their goals?
That's the big question.
We'll have to keep digging to find out.
Exactly. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore the nuances of Eritrea's strategy and examine the challenges they face, both domestically and on the international stage.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Welcome back, you guys. It's fascinating to consider Eritrea's position, isn't it? They're this small nation.
Yeah.
But they're clearly aiming high, trying to chart their own course in a world where so many others seem content to follow the well-worn paths.
It's like they're saying, we're not going to just accept the role that's been assigned to us. We're going to write our own story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that story is all about challenging the status quo, both in terms of their own development and their place in the global order. Remember how Minister Yamani emphasized that modular approach to regional cooperation?
Right, building those strong regional partnerships as the foundation for something bigger.
Yeah.
But to be honest, that whole modular approach thing still feels a bit abstract to me.
Okay.
What does it actually look like on the ground? Who are they partnering with and how?
Okay, well, let's start with the obvious.
Yeah.
Eritrea is part of the Horn of Africa, right?
Right.
It's this incredibly complex region with a long history of conflict, but also a lot of potential.
Yeah, it's like a crossroads of cultures, languages, and political systems. You've got Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti, Sudan.
Right.
It's a real melting pot, and not always in a harmonious way.
Precisely. And Eritrea's relationships with its neighbors have been, shall we say, turbulent at times?
Yeah.
But there have also been some encouraging developments in recent years.
Like that peace agreement with Ethiopia in 2018, right? Ending that long-standing border conflict was huge.
It was a major breakthrough, and it opened up possibilities for economic cooperation, trade, and even people-to-people exchanges.
Wow.
So you could see Ethiopia as a key partner in Eritrea's modular approach.
Okay, that makes sense. They're literally next door to each other, so working together would be mutually beneficial. But what about the other countries in the region?
Well, Eritrea has strong ties with Djibouti, which is strategically important because of its port.
Right.
Remember, access to trade routes is crucial for a country like Eritrea that's trying to develop its economy and attract foreign investment.
Ah, so Djibouti becomes a gateway to the world. It's like that old saying, location, location, location.
Right.
But they can't just focus on their immediate neighbors, right?
Right.
Minister Yamani also talked about this blue economy concept, which implies a much broader regional outlook.
Absolutely. Eritrea's got that long coastline along the Red Sea, and that puts them in a unique position to engage with countries on the other side of the sea, like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and even Egypt.
So their modular approach isn't just about building a strong bloc in the Horn of Africa.
Right.
It's about extending their reach across the Red Sea, creating this multi-layered network of partnerships based on shared interests.
Think about maritime security, fisheries, management, even tourism.
Wow.
There's so much potential for cooperation in the Red Sea region, and Eritrea seems to be positioning itself as a key player.
It's like they're playing a long game carefully, cultivating these relationships and building trust over time. But of course, it's not just about external partnerships. They also need to get their own house in order, right?
Right. And that brings us back to this idea of the social contract, which was a central theme of Minister Yaman's speech.
Right.
Remember, he emphasized that economic development isn't enough. It needs to be linked to social justice, to ensuring that all Eritreans benefit from the nation's progress.
He even used that phrase, stakeholder rights, which really stuck with me.
Yeah.
It implies a sense of accountability, a recognition that the government has a responsibility to ensure that the fruits of development are shared equitably.
It's like they're saying, we're not just building an economy.
Right.
We're building a society. And that society needs to be based on fairness, equality, and respect for the sacrifices of the Eritrean people.
It's a powerful message for sure. But I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical.
Okay.
We can't just gloss over the criticisms of Eritrea's human rights record, can we?
Of course not. And that's where things get really complicated. You can't talk about a social contract without addressing those concerns about political freedom. freedom of speech, and the role of dissent in a healthy society.
Exactly. And that's where those negative narratives that Eritrea is so keen on countering come into play.
And we need to understand where those narratives are coming from.
Yeah.
Some of them stem from Eritrea's long history of conflict. The war for independence, the border dispute with Ethiopia. These events have shaped perceptions of Eritrea as a volatile nation.
And there are also concerns about their political system. The lack of democratic institutions, the restrictions on freedoms. These things raise red flags for a lot of international observers.
And then there's the issue of national service. Which is often criticized as forced conscription.
That indefinite national service requirement has been a major source of controversy.
It's a complex issue with historical roots, but is definitely a hurdle for Eritrea as they try to rebrand themselves on the global stage.
So these negative narratives are a mix of historical baggage, current political realities, and perceptions that may or may not be accurate. And they present a real challenge for Eritrea as they try to attract investment, build partnerships, and project this image of a stable, self-reliant nation.
It's a classic PR problem, right? You can have the best product in the world, but if people have a negative perception of your brand, it's going to be tough to sell it.
Exactly. So how do they overcome that? Is it just about telling a better story, or does it require more fundamental changes?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, I don't think there's an easy answer. But one thing is clear. They can't just ignore those criticisms. They need to engage with them, address them head on, and demonstrate a willingness to change.
Okay, so let's assume for a moment that they can manage to shift those negative perceptions. What does success look like for Eritrea? What are they ultimately trying to achieve?
Well, on a practical level, they want economic prosperity. They want to develop their resources, create jobs, and improve the standard of living for their people.
That makes sense. But it seems like it goes beyond just material wealth, right?
Absolutely. For Eritrea, it's about self-reliance, about proving that they can succeed on their own terms without being beholden to outside powers. It's about reclaiming their narrative, shaping their own destiny.
And it's about earning respect on the global stage, right? Having a voice, being a player, not just a pawn in someone else's game.
Exactly. They want to be seen as a model for other developing nations. A beacon of hope in a region that's often associated with conflict and poverty.
But there are a lot of potential pitfalls along the way, right? I mean, we can't just assume that everything will go smoothly.
Of course not. And that's what makes this whole story so compelling. There are so many factors at play, so many potential roadblocks.
Like what are some of the things that could derail Eritrea's ambitions?
Well, for starters, there's the geopolitical landscape. The Horn of Africa is a volatile region with a lot of competing interests. If Eritrea gets too closely aligned with one power, it could alienate others and find itself caught in the crossfire.
It's like walking a tightrope. They need to maintain their independence while also building strategic partnerships.
Exactly.
And then there's the internal situation, right? We talked about the human rights concerns, the lack of political freedom.
Exactly. If they don't address those issues, it could undermine their efforts to attract investment and build credibility on the world stage. It's like trying to sell a product with a faulty design.
So it's a balancing act. They need to focus on economic development, but they also need to create a more open and inclusive society.
And they need to do all of this while navigating a complex web of regional and global power dynamics. It's a tall order, to say the least.
Okay, so let's bring it back to our listener, you. Why should you care about what's happening in Eritrea?
Well, for one, the Horn of Africa is a strategically important region. It's a gateway to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, which is vital for global trade.
So any instability in the region could have ripple effects around the world.
Exactly. And Eritrea, with its strategic location and its ambitious agenda, could play a key role in shaping the future of the Horn of Africa.
Plus, their story is just inherently fascinating, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It's a story of resilience, of ambition, of a nation trying to defy the odds.
It's a reminder that even in a world that can feel increasingly interconnected and homogenized, there are still countries charting their own unique paths, writing their own narratives.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so intriguing. We've explored Eritrea's past, their present, and their potential future. We've examined their strengths and their weaknesses, their ambitions and their challenges. And we've left you, our listener, with some thought-provoking questions to ponder.
What will become of Eritrea's social contract? Will they manage to strike that delicate balance between economic development and social justice?
Will they overcome the negative narratives and earn a place of respect on the global stage?
And how will their choices impact the Horn of Africa and the wider world?
These are questions that only time will answer. Yeah. But one thing is certain, Eritrea's journey will be one to watch.
It will.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time, ready to explore another fascinating corner of our complex and ever-changing world.